Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Copper Club podcast, where we'll be looking at the Libertadores 2024 final. We have Atletico Mineiro in one corner and Botafogo in the other. It is an all Brazilian affair, but it's going to be quite feisty based on what we saw last night. We are recording on Thursday, the 21st, just before the next round of Brasileiro games. But there's going to be plenty to get stuck into, and I'm joined by Peter Pankowski. Peter, how are we doing, my friend?
Great. I'm looking forward to it, as well as the Sudamericana final now. So it's massive week upcoming.
Of course, it is. It is the season, definitely. And look, we're not alone. We're joined by the football travel man on Instagram, who's currently living my dream at the moment, Joseph O'Sullivan, also a South American expert. Joe, welcome to the podcast. How are we doing?
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. I'm great, guys. How are you?
Very, very well. And look, before we kickstart the podcast, delighted to announce we have an official sponsor in Player Stats who are going to be on board for upcoming series. So delighted to have them on board. They offer a complete football data guide. So if you want to get your player stats, team stats, favorite players, everything in between, they offer a monthly service. So if you stick around, we'll tell you a little bit more about them later, and also a unique 20% discount off their monthly subscriptions through our podcast. So a huge thank you to them coming on board. Now, Joe, I'm going to come to you first because I said you're living my dream at the moment. You're currently in Buenos Aires and you've been to all the semi-finals, which logistically, I'm not sure how you've managed to do that, but just talk us through your journey at the moment and just make me even more jealous.
Yeah, so it worked out perfectly this year because both first leg semi-finals fell in Brazil, and then the second two in Buenos Aires and Montevideo, which is obviously Uruguayan capital, just a short hop across the Rio de la Plata on the boat. So it worked out that it was even possible to do all four. And then I managed to get some work things in place that I could go and do it and live it and see all four games live. So living my dream as well, to be honest. I really appreciate that I got to do it. It was absolutely amazing. On the pitch, the football and, the big wins from the Brazilians and then off the pitch as well, particularly in the second legs where River Plate and Peñarol give us some football in fiestas in and around the stadium, even though they looked down and out. And the people I met along the way, and now being on the ground in Buenos Aires in the lead up to the final is amazing too. Soon we'll start to see Brazilians arrive. One or two people I met at the semis. So no, man, it's been a dream, and more than anything, as a European, to see what it means to people over here, has been incredible as well.
Yeah, I definitely recommend for people to check out your Instagram and look at some of the content, because everyone saw the clips of River Plate and El Monumental for that second leg. As a neutral, we probably all wish that it wasn't 3-0 to Mineiro heading into it, just to make that second leg that little bit more glorious, because it was all but done, but the atmosphere was incredible. But we didn't really get to see much, as I say, here in Europe. We didn't see much else apart from what was going on at El Monumental. So what was your favourite tie or ground to go to? Because that Gallo first leg looked something else.
Yeah, that was fantastic, and I got really lucky with who I went to that game with. I ended up spending all afternoon in one of the sort of torcedor organized fan group clubhouses, if you like, and they brought me in as one of their own. The churrasco was going all afternoon. They were all super, super upbeat, all with sort of like a bit of respect, not fear, I'd say, but a lot of respect for River Plate, but at the same time, quite confident in their team. And it was just a big party. There was people who had flown from the States or London or places where they'd lived to come back and sort of tie a family trip home to Brazil in to make sure they were there for that match. And then Botafogo was a similar thing. They all sort of think it's their time, do you know what I mean? So lots of anticipation. And yeah, River Plate was incredible, but the atmosphere at those two games in Brazil as well was pretty special.
And before we dive into this final, definitely we must have a word for Peñarol, because they were excellent in this competition and they certainly brought the noise. And I know that the semi-final leg changed with the stadium and everything which was going on there, but how good has it been to see a team away from even Brazil and Argentina like get to the latter stages of the tournament? We rarely see it these days, and I think it's just a nice reminder of what South America's all about when it comes to its football.
Yeah, so refreshing. I could not believe, given everything around the semi-final, second leg, change of stadium, trouble with fans, and the fact that they were 5-0 down, the atmosphere that they created, it was immense. I sort of got there thinking, might have a dead rubber, might have a bit of a tense atmosphere, and it was anything but. It was an absolute party. Obviously, Big Scalp beating Flamengo in the round before, and they all sort of started believing, and then were taught a harsh lesson at Botafogo. But they were amazing, and it is in a way it's a shame not taking anything away from the final that obviously River Plate didn't make it as the home team, but also if Peñarol had made that, I think scary numbers would have made the journey across to Buenos Aires from Uruguay. But nonetheless, it looks like Botafogo, from what I've read, are going to be the team that's travelling particularly well. And yeah, you get to see when you're on the ground as well, the ins and outs of the logistics for the fans. You know, we think maybe in Europe an away trip to Italy or Spain can be a logistical headache at times or be expensive. The distances these guys are dealing with as away fans, the police presence, if you like, is another level. Fan issues can be another level. And the prices, especially for Brazilians, once it looked like they were getting to the final to get to Buenos Aires, you know, there's some people who've been at most games all year and they just can't go, or they're getting a bus for 2 days. So the dedication that these are putting in, honestly, it's ridiculous.
I think you see it every year, and I think this was the Sudamericana, but I saw a clip online and it was an Argentinian fan who had like spray painted his windscreen of his car, and he was willing to sell it because he wanted to go and obviously see Racing in Asuncion. And I just think, as you said there, the price, like we regularly talk on this podcast about like how the players are traveling here, there, and everywhere 2 or 3 days, but obviously they're getting paid to do it as well. But like the fans, like you said, it's the distances from one country to the next, multiple competitions across the year. It's a grueling calendar for 8 to 10 months. So yeah, I think we need to try and appreciate the fans a little bit more where we can. But I agree with you, Peñarol in the final, no matter where that will happen again one day potentially, would be quite incredible. But let's talk about Mineiro and Botafogo. Like I said, time of recording on Thursday the 21st, they played overnight. They played in an empty stadium purely because of, well, fan trouble with Mineiro in the Copa do Brazil second leg final. But even though there wasn't any fans, there was certainly a lot of fireworks and handbags towards the end. Once again, Botafogo frustrated with a 0-0 draw. Mineiro, it was a 7th match without a win. We'll touch on that in a minute, but I just think this, Pete, I'll come to you for this. It added a lot more spice to the game because I think a lot of people were looking at this going, Mineiro are coming into this with poor form. Botafogo slightly struggling, but as Joe said, the fans feel like it's definitely their time. But again, frustrated. The centre back Barbosa, got sent off. Luis Enrique got sent off for throwing a water bottle afterwards. He's going to be suspended for a fair few weeks. I know this doesn't impact the Libertadores final, but all of a sudden, maybe this is going to play to Mineiro's strengths because they probably know they're coming into this as the underdogs, having lost 3-0 in the previous leg and their current form and how well Botafogo are flying. But maybe this was a bit of mind games which has rattled Botafogo. What do you think?
Well, I had to jinx them, honestly, because I did say 2 weeks ago that we were kind of, well, my expectation was Botafogo likely do the double this year. And now they're just 2 points off Palmeiras. Their head's gone. But no, in all seriousness, I think it definitely adds an additional flair to this already big match. It's definitely a big question mark with regards to how Botafogo approach things now. I know that they don't have those players suspended, obviously, Luis Enrique being the main factor here. But on one hand, I'd like to say that for Mineiro, I think it's massive because they went in this game, I think, as you said, on the back of a not so good streak of games where they've kind of failed to get results. They're already down to, I think it's 11th place now in the Serie A. And the one thing, however, I've noticed, and I've really been positively surprised by Mineiro because I've gone on record saying I'm not really impressed with the defense that they have. They've become a little bit harder to beat now. They don't actually concede as many goals. Even if they do, as I said, they're hard to beat. You don't usually grind out results against them with ease. And in that sense, it's definitely a catalyzing sort of effect for them to not concede against Botafogo now, especially before this big game, a week before this, making them kind of lose their heads in a sense, because you saw the scenes with Hulk and with Luis Enrique. Let's be honest, Hulk always has something to say to the referee or anybody else on the sideline. This has been an ongoing issue now, but it is a positive for them more so than it is for Botafogo. Botafogo, for me, it's definitely one where when you look at it on paper, this shouldn't be too much of an effect. But then again, when it comes to like title race, and that's on the back of their minds now, again, after building such a nice momentum with Palmeiras dropping points, them winning and now back-to-back draws against Flamengo with no goal scored, and now against Mineiro again with no goal scored, it definitely kind of would linger in the back of their mind. I think I wouldn't expect them to be too like this to have too much of a negative impact, but it will definitely be one that will probably be there, like as I said, linger in their mind in a sense.
Let's stick with Mineiro now. And yes, they're winless in 7, but Gabriel Milito has turned them into, it's almost like Fluminense of last season, where they sort of almost sacked off the league at one point and then had this incredible run. Like, they've won all their home games in the Libertadores, got to the Copa do Brazil final against Flamengo, and then unfortunately fell short there. Joe, from your time there with Mineiro at home, obviously this is going to be at a neutral stadium, but looking at the team, like, is there anybody in there which stands out for you as the potential match winner? Or was it glaringly obvious with their front line?
Yeah, I think that's it. I think if you sort of mix the general experience and solidity of the team when they want to sort of turn it on, when they did against River in the first leg, for example, the fact that they've had Libertadores success relatively recently, or in their history in general, compared to obviously Botafogo, and then you add the sort of Hulk and Deverson match up at the top, and their ability to just literally throw one pass and cause absolute chaos for the other team, and the intangible sort of talents of the likes of Deverson in particular to rile up the opposition team. Seeing the scenes from last night as well, obviously the Mineiro players seemed very unhappy with some spicy comments from Luis Enrique towards their team. I think if he basically told them that they were shit, didn't he?
You can say it. You can say it on the podcast.
Yeah,
it's fine.
I can say it. Yeah, he basically told them they were shit, and they weren't very happy about that. But even the way in which Hulk sort of dealt with it, spoke to the managers, spoke to the press. I was also in the sort of, it's Botafogo's time thing. They're just going to run their way to 2 titles, and I wouldn't say it was a massive momentum swing last night, but it was just another example of how you can't write Mineiro off and players like that with such experience, and whether they just handed over a little bit of impetus last night, Botafogo, unintentionally to them. Um, I think if they play this final 5 times, Botafogo, look, we know how good they've been this year, but just the way Mineiro can manage things and frustrate them like last night. And I think their fans know that and are quite excited by that as well. And if they're given slight underdog status, they're all the happier.
It's really interesting because we're sat here. I know we haven't touched on them just yet, but we're sat here saying, look, Botafogo have the pressure of trying to win the league for the first time in 30 plus years. Obviously, the first ever Libertadores title, but Mineiro's run of form has led them into part of the relegation scrap, which, to be fair, at the moment goes all the way up to about 8th place, which is just ridiculous. But they haven't won in 7, and they're 2 wins, 6 points off the drop at the moment. And now I know there's a lot of teams in and amongst that, but that adds an awful lot of pressure coming to this as well, because once the final's been and done, I know we're getting onto a slightly different topic here, but once that title's been and done, whether they win it or not, they have to salvage their season. So that'll be weighing on their minds as well. So we're maybe not going to get quite that open game as expected. And I think maybe last night was a glimpse of that. Mineiro were quite happy to soak up a lot of the pressure. And I think that's how you stifle Botafogo. If you if you go toe to toe with Botafogo, as Penarol did in that first leg in Brazil on that big plastic pitch, Botafogo have so many players now who can rip them apart. Where Mineiro last night, even though it was a half and half side, they just know almost how to, dare I say it, they know how to shit out as a result. And then I think that's exactly what they'll do or try to do against Botafogo. I think what plays into quote unquote the favourites' hands at the moment is El Monumental is also a fairly big pitch, right? So that could be duplicated and maybe seen as a slight advantage. And as you said, Joe, I think they've sold out their allocation already because it's such a big occasion for them. And I know it's a completely different squad to last year, but it still feels the same sort of vibes with that weight of expectation. They're sort of struggling with it. They've had a couple of slightly easier games heading into this final and haven't delivered. And that's maybe where Mineiro can win it. So yeah, we've picked out Hulk and Davison. But is there anyone else in there, Peter, Joseph, Mineiro, who you think could potentially win it? Because I know a certain ex-Nottingham Forest player, Gustavo Scarpa,
I was
could
going to
again
mention that.
be the
I
difference.
was just
Peter,
about to say.
talk about him.
What what is there really to say when you think about him? Because he's one of the players that hasn't really. When you remember how he played at Fluminense, and even before that, he was one of the best players in the Serie A, and it was kind of sad to see him not hit up the. I think he was injured at Forest. Correct me if I'm wrong here. And then he got shipped off to Olympiacos without even having like a proper shot at everything, and then he came back to Brazil. So I kind of, despite me not wanting Atletico Mineiro to win, honestly, because I prefer Cruzeiro, this is from a neutral standpoint. But I kind of want if
That's
Mineiro
not
are to
neutral
win
then,
it,
is it?
yeah, well, somewhat neutral. Like my team in Brazil is Grêmio, you know this. Let's be real. But my point being is that if Mineiro get to win, I'd like to see him win it because he's one of the players that kind of has that X factor in him. I know we spoke about X factors in the previous pod about someone like Mateus Pereira from Cruzeiro, but Scarpa is also that. He's one that I wouldn't. When you see Mineiro potentially shutting up shop, I don't think he'll be that much of an effect on the ball because he'll barely get on it. But once he does, he can create something out of nothing, and that's, as I said, X factor player. I know Hulk is Hulk, and even Paulinho, despite his down year, can create something out of nothing. And then Davison's finishing ability is, despite his shithousery, he's proven to be a massively effective player. I know we spoke about it a couple of months ago, how Mineiro brought him in, and I expected this, but actually he's been better than I honestly expected because he chipped in with some very vital goals, especially in the semi-final, mind you. But Scarpa is the one that should be getting a lot more kind of headlines, if I do say so, than he is currently getting, and he's kind of fallen a bit under the radar, which is hard to say for someone of his level because he's just that good, really. And I
Yeah,
wouldn't be
3 goals,
surprised.
4 assists. Sorry, Peter. 3 goals, 4 assists in 11 games. Milito has chosen to play him on the right wing. And yeah, like Joe said, those balls into the box, well, I mean, they're excellent balls into the box when Scarpa's on it. And now having not just Hulk, but Davison as well, who's been a perfect addition. And do you know what? If you told me we would be recording this podcast 12 months ago and we weren't even talking about Paulinho because of how poor he's been, Mineiro have moved to bring in Davison and recognise an area where they needed to improve drastically. And he's the one who's dragged them to the final. And we all know what he's like on and off the ball. Like Joe said, winding players up. Like the longer that game goes 0-0, that could be perfectly written for somebody who has won the Libertadores title. So look, that's the end of part 1. Return for part 2, where we'll be talking about Botafogo. Football fans and stat lovers, listen up. If you're serious about understanding the game and digging deeper into the numbers, you've got to check out Player Stats. It's the ultimate platform for both football stats and player data. With Player Stats, you can see every stat at a glance, so there's no more clicking or digging around. Whether you're tracking player performances, team stats, or just want to explore detailed player props, Player Stats makes it simple, fast, and comprehensive. And here's the best part. As a listener of this podcast, you can get 20% off your first month when you sign up with the code COPPER. That's right, full access to all leagues, players, and stats, now at an exclusive discount. Player Stats, complete football data at a glance. Welcome back to part 2 of our Libertadores preview. We've spoken about Mineiro and how potentially they can pinch the title, but Botafogo, they're the favourites. They're the most exciting team in Brazil. They almost need a title really under their belt to really get them going. I think I said a few weeks ago they could be the big dominant team in South America for years to come if they manage it right and almost replace Flamengo and Palmeiras. They do need to get that title. Joe, coming to you first. Do you think they can?
Yes, definitely. Before last night or a week ago, I would have said you know, said it before to people that I think it's their year and they'll win them both. Um, a bit like the upstart Chelsea and City teams in Europe, it's like eventually they're just gonna win it because the investment's there. Not only are they spending money, but they're doing it right. They've been amazing this year, and despite uh, the bottle jobs essentially of the last year or two, sooner or later you imagine they're going to do it. So whether they can keep blazing that trail on, but this is the thing. On the other hand, this is the exact point in the season where the last year or two things have just spiraled out of control and went wrong for them, and they have ended up bottling the league title and stuff like that. So they played Palmeiras in the league, if I'm not mistaken, 4 days before the Copa Libertadores final. It could be, even a good result there and win the final, the best week of their lives, or it could literally all go very badly.
Pear-shaped is what you were looking for.
Yes, pear-shaped. I was going to say a few things there, but it could go terribly wrong in that week for them as well. And it's like Chiellini for Juventus post Spurs. It doesn't matter how much the squad has changed. The club has that reputation now, whether it's fair or not, and that will play on the players' minds with these 0-0 draws and all the anticipation of the last 4 or 5 games of the league or whatever. So I think they're capable if they can sort of block that noise out. And aside from that, they are playing a team in the final that over 90 minutes can just have their number and can just beat them, and it's one game of football. But maybe they need to win one of the two big trophies this year, because I think were they to not win either of them, wow, that would be absolutely heartbreaking for them to take, given how close they've come again and again and again.
And how do you almost bounce back from that? Because I think the idea when John Textor brought in Luis Enrique and Thiago Almada was to win a trophy and potentially ship them on to one of his other teams. But there's been a lot of interviews where they've almost been convinced to be part of the Botafogo project. But the longer they go without a trophy and the older these players get, they'll want that chance to go to Europe or go back to Europe in Henrique's case and succeed. So as you said, it's a monumental week. But look, their route to the final in the knockout stages, they beat Palmeiras, they beat Sao Paulo, they've beaten better teams. But I think it's really important to pull out the fact that they'd lost the first 2 games in the group. Arthur Jorge came in 2 or 3 days before their first match against Junior, lost 3-1 at home. And I think he realised how much he had to come in and change. Like from where the team is now to even 6-7 months ago has changed drastically and in their favour. But credit needs to go to the ex-Braga manager, because the amount of attacking talent they have, like you look across their front line, Almada, Henrique, Jesus, Savarino, there's so many big players, but he manages to get them all working within his system, which is a credit to him, which is why they've advanced to this stage of the competition. So I'm very much in your camp. If he'd asked me a week ago, I'd very much be like, yes, this is Botafogo's time to shine. But there's just been a few things which have gone wrong. But as you said, if they get a positive result against Palmeiras, Peter, surely Botafogo have too much in that final third for Mineiro's back line, because you've not been a fan of Mineiro's defence all season long.
Yes, but at the same time, let's flip the script. I don't think whilst Botafogo have the talent, undoubtedly, I don't think they've shown kind of a one weakness that when they want to establish this sort of domination on the pitch, they play with a high enough line. They want to absolutely suffocate an opponent. And there are gaps to be exploited. And if there's one team you'd hate to have such gaps be exploited against, it's Mineiro because of their firepower. So it's one where, yes, if you feel you have to place a favorite, Botafogo are a heavy favorite in my opinion. But at the same time, I wouldn't doubt Mineiro being a very tricky side to play against, especially now that they've kind of been able to, as I said, shut up shop, be a little bit more solid. Not a little bit even, mind you. But I think this is kind of the crunch time where you see Botafogo and their whole project. It's not a make or break thing for me. Yes, I know they're in a position to win two titles. The Serie A is the Copa Libertadores. It doesn't get any bigger than this. Don't get me wrong, but I'm saying it's a make or break time because this is why we saw the whole investment and the buying of stars and star players for Brazil standards and so on, and having the depth, the plethora of depth, mind you, at hand. Because when you have Palmeiras and then 4 days, I think it is, or 3 days later, you have the Libertadores final, you have to have all the talent in the world potentially. As I said, again, in terms of Brazilian standards or South American standards, that is, in order to tackle those games in quick succession. And they do have that. And this is why I still feel they are the heavy favorites in both games, because against Palmeiras, we saw just how dominant and how good they can be. And that's why they won over the course of two legs. And I feel they can easily do that again at Serie A level, even despite these games against Flamengo and against Atletico Mineiro. I don't think this isn't just that inadequate representation of where that attacking talent lies. And I feel if they manage to break, they have to only break through the gap once, and then doors go wide open. They potentially could go on and score another two. And on the flip side of it, if they get frustrated and try and overcommit because they're not getting that goal, that's when things kind of turn for the worse. And I think that's basically, I use the phrase again, make or break, but that's where kind of the game will be make or break. It's basically a fine margin in their case.
Every time I ask you for a prediction, no matter what game it is, Peter, you sit firmly on that fence. When I come to your overall prediction here, I think you're going to put out 2 or 3. But I do agree with you, the fact that, look, Botafogo, if it doesn't go their way in that first half, first 60 minutes or so, like we saw how wound up Barbosa got, and he needlessly headbutted, I can't remember who it was in the Mineiro game last night, but he headbutted and got sent off. I shouldn't be using the word needlessly for a headbutt anyway, but he got so wound up, like he got himself sent off. And so Botafogo could be sort of the masters of their own downfall if they don't manage this game correctly. And I agree with you, they are a little bit vulnerable if they overcommit too many people. But then I don't really see Mineiro as that big counter-attacking play. I think if they are going to get a goal, it's going to be something which is Route 1 football or from Scarpa out wide. So look, I think it is make or break for Botafogo, because if you look at the rumours now and look how transfers work so quickly, Savarino has been linked with Villarreal, and he's 27, 28. This is his last chance of going to Europe. Iger Jesus, who came in from UAE, like on a free transfer, by the way, it's been incredible business, but he's riding the wave of their potential overhype at the moment, but he's been linked with European moves for 25, 30 million, with like West Ham being interested. So all of a sudden, if these players depart, Botafogo, still, yes, they've got a good core, but they have to rebuild and go again, which could be incredibly difficult for them. Joe, do you agree with my thoughts?
Yeah, it all depends what happens in the summer. In the case that they don't get the job done this year, how those that stay can sort of dust themselves off and go again. And yeah, the names you mentioned, Enrique Almada, how long are these boys going to sort of wait on this Texter Libertadores project when I'm sure there's lots of offers coming in from Europe and elsewhere? We know how competitive the league is in Brazil. We know how difficult it is to get to a Libertadores final. I don't want to say it's make or break, because I do think if those guys go, other guys will be brought in. I think Texter's got the bit between his teeth with this. You see how sort of on the ground he is at Botafogo. He's clearly more than invested in it. And I think maybe it'll take another few years, but I do think they'll get there eventually. So it's really hard to say. Honestly, it's hard to say. We saw what happened with Fluminense after they won their title, completely fell off. It's just so massive, and I think Mineiro are a dangerous opponent. I don't think it can be understated either how they dealt with the semis. Even the fact that they went to the Monumental for the second leg is a fantastic dress rehearsal. Uh, they give River a lot of half chances early on, but then they managed the game well. They looked lethal on the counter attack. I think it was Scarpa rattled the ball with that one.
Mm.
That particular counter attack was amazing. We know they've got the players for that. So yeah, dangerous. With Peter here, it's hard not to sit in the fence. You throw into the fact that a few hot-headed moments in the game can leave either team easily with 10 men. We know what football's like in South America, and that passion transcends, and they actively want players to think and act like fans here, and show that passion for better or worse at times instead of being really like cold-blooded. And maybe Mineiro have been to a place that Botafogo have not been before, a challenge they've not done before. So I really have to sit in the fence. A week ago I was saying, nah, Botafogo are going to do it. They're going to win everything. But it's
Sadly,
pretty impossible to predict.
Sadly, on this
me
podcast,
Nick,
Go
can I
on,
cut you
Peter.
off for a second? Do you want me
Sure.
to give you one bold prediction that I'm absolutely certain will happen?
Well, look.
Davison is not starting this final. Just watch. He's
You don't
coming
think
off
Dave?
post 60. Yes, I don't think he will start. He's coming off post 60 minutes because imagine this. If the game is still in a position for Mineiro to win potentially, whether that's 0-0, whether that's 1-1, it doesn't matter, or even 1-0 down potentially. After post, say, 55th, 60 minutes, as we said, drama, tension, and everything, Davison is the one player that can get anybody sent off at any moment in time. And that's when you want him on the pitch. And against tired legs.
Surely you'd want him on for the whole 90
I want him on
minutes
for
if he's capable at any
120
minute.
if you ask me. I know my Flamengo mutuals will hate me because of their history with him. But I want him on for the whole 120 minutes of this spectacle because he's in essence, he's something like amazing. Like I adore him. Just the pure levels of like I don't even know how to say it that he goes to.
Yeah.
Showmanship. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. To put it nicely, showmanship is actually perfect.
Yeah.
Well saved, Joe. Well saved.
I think. Yeah. Thank you. But I think.
Okay.
I honestly believe he won't start. And
well,
I can explain
if we're continuing bold predictions around the scoreline before we eventually get to that, I think that's a really bold decision because I think if Mineiro don't win this or if they are embarrassed in the final, this could be Milito's last game, which I know sounds ridiculous because he's got to the Copa do Brazil final and the Libertadores, but how poor they've been in the league, like we know like managers have been sacked for a lot less. So it would, for me, it'd be a really bold decision to not play Davison because Paulinho's been rubbish all year. Hulk needs to have somebody in and around him. And as you said there, like he can get anybody sent off and rolled up. Now, if I had a player like Davison, I'd be playing him from the first minute. So we'll park that. We'll wait and see. Joe, unfortunately, I'm going to pick on you first. You're our guest. I'm going to come to you first for a final result, whether you're thinking it's extra time, penalties, or if it's going to be done in 90. Thoughts, instinct.
Extra time. Extra time. I think I'm more sure of extra time than who I think will actually win this game. I think you can see both teams scoring. I don't think it'll be particularly exciting though. I think, they'll both be cautious, wanting to cancel each other out. Perhaps similar to last night, Mineiro, that style of play suits them against the pace and style Botafogo have. And Botafogo, maybe just out of nervousness, might curl up a little bit and try and not lose as opposed to win early on. Man, bloody hell, who's going to win it?
I think
it's going to be a moment, isn't it? It's going to be a moment.
Yeah.
If it doesn't go all the way to penalties, it'll be a moment. Who will write their name into the history books? Literally, will it be a bit of magic from any of the sort of front 3 or 4 of each team that we mentioned? I hope it's just not a stupid red card or a dodgy penalty decision. I hope it's a great advert. Last year the Fluminense Boca game could have been rubbish given how Boca were playing going into that final. And in the end we had some great goals, great moments. So
John Kennedy's match winner was
exactly. Something like that would be
unbelievable.
fantastic either
That's what we
way.
want.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think a lot of the time, a European audience will tune in for the final because it's on normal TV at a good time. And then sometimes people are a bit disappointed, being like, you watch this all year round. But as you touched upon at the start, the pure emotion from the players, the fans, like Fluminense, Boca was a cry fest before it started. And probably took 20, 30 minutes to really get going just because there's so much pressure to win that Libertadores title. So for people who are going to be watching the final, like, take it with a pinch of salt. I mean, unless it's absolutely incredible, and I say it's like that every week, but do tune into the quarters and the semis, because I think that really sells like what the tournament's all about. And then yeah, there's just an awful lot on the line. I'm siding with you. I do like the fact that extra time is the option with the final. I think it'll be 1-1, but I said it's really interesting because when we did this first preview 6, 7, 8 months ago, whatever it is, I said the two teams who I like to be in the final would be Mineiro and Botafogo. So it's not even like I can stick with one and lean towards the other. But I'm going to say 1-1, and I think Botafogo could potentially get over the line. I think that moment of magic. They have too many players in that final third, a tied back line in that extra time, and also to beat Sao Paulo away on penalties to get to the semi-final. So look, I think there's that edge there, and as you said, they've sold out their end as well, and I think it'll be an unbelievable atmosphere before the game. So I will put my neck on the line and say extra time, Botafogo. Peter, prediction please, don't go around the houses.
Yeah. I think this is just a Thiago Almada game, if I'm honest. I think this is his moment. We've been banging on the drum about him being a very good player that should be in Europe right now, and he's gone into Brazil, and I just feel this will be his time to shine. He's not one to shy away from big games, definitely, and I don't know why I feel he's just going to be like the X factor. I love this word, I guess. The X factor in this game. If I have to say score, I wouldn't, as you guys said, I wouldn't be surprised of extra time. So I'll probably put my money on a 2-1 Botafogo win. But for name's sake, I'd love it if Davis scores for a 1-0 victory in the 119th minute. Like, I would
Well,
adore it. The amount of celebrations and stuff that will happen after his goal will be amazing. Like,
There's so many stories here.
at
I
this
think
point, I
there's
wouldn't
not
be
even one
surprised if he
angle, is
gets
there?
naked. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
with Davison,
we'll
you
go
never
past
know.
that image.
With
But yeah,
with
like you said, like
Davison, you never know.
Almada to win it in Argentina, that's a nice story. Davison to come back and win another one. There's so many decent angles here for journalists. If you don't produce a good piece after this final, then you're in the wrong game. But we will leave it there. I hope you've enjoyed the Sudamericana preview and also this Libertadores one. Please do subscribe across Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. And we will see you for next season's Libertadores.